Good evening, Lambda School. So, my name's Thomas. I am the lead section manager for the pre-course. Unfortunately, Deandra had to step out this evening. However, I will be teaching you about classes and objects this evening. In that regard, let me start off as they all have been if you're just joining us or have amnesia from the previous weeks. Lambda School is a 7-month immersive bootcamp. The unique thing about Lambda School, I think the unique thing about Lambda School is the teachers, but on paper, the unique thing about Lambda School is the fact that they have a unique payment program. They allow you to pay after you get a job and are making $50,000 or more a year. And that provides you the opportunity that provides so many people the opportunity that you wouldn't normally be able to get. I know in my personal experience, I wouldn't have been able to shell out 12, 13, 17, 22 in some cases, $1,000, $22,000 for any boot camp. That included college at the time. So I am extremely happy that they offer this program, and it's literally changed my life. Beyond that, let's actually get into what today is about, and that's classes and objects. We went over a little bit about objects previously, and I just sort of want to refresh that here. So I have a basic object. The object name here is Ninja Assassin, because who doesn't like assassins, especially ones that are ninjas? This is fairly basic. You have remember key value parse. That's the literal definition of an object. If you have a function as the value of an object, it's a method. So this is a method. Huh. Strange. Oh, I'm in CoffeeScript. Give me just a very brief second here. Just going to briefly stop the share. And much better. So there we are, proper syntax highlighting now. Anyway, if you have a property that's a function on or the value that's a function on a method, or a property that is a function on an object, there we are, it's a method. Beyond that, there's some very basic things going on here. We're assigning values to keys. So since we're here, and since we briefly discussed this last night, let's go over a little bit more while we're here. The easiest way to realize what this is referring to is to look at, for example, if we were to invoke is to look at what's before the dot. This, in the circumstance of kill, is referring specifically to Ninja Assassin. We'll get more on that later, and we can see that if we invoke this function, it successfully increments head count. So I have one Ninja Assassin. Now, who only wants one Ninja Assassin? Let's actually build more. And since we're being so creative, let's also have a warrior assassin. And you know what? I'm just going to copy and paste all of that. Now, with any luck, Deandra got through to you guys, and you already noticed that something's going wrong. The fact that I had to copy and paste anything means that this isn't exactly dry, is it? Just to remind you, dry is don't repeat yourself. It's as simple as that. The fact that we did have to copy and paste all of this code means that something's going wrong. And so each of these also refer to a different object. So if I wanted to rename Stealthy, I would have to go through each and every object that I continue to create. All right, so how do we solve this? Well, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent here. It was mentioned, I believe, by Dan last night, very briefly, that everything in JavaScript is an object, every single thing. Strings are objects. We can tell because they have methods. Because, well, that's a horrible one. There we go. And if they have methods, then those methods need to be set up in some sort of organization like this, which means that string, any string at the end of it, is in fact an object. We'll actually get back to that and play a little bit with these global prototypes a bit later. But for the meanwhile, since everything is an object, and we obviously don't copy each one of those two uppercase methods to every single string, and we obviously don't instantiate a new string with all of this nonsense, giving it a name and the string value and thusly all of the various functions, there must be another way to do all of this. Well, it turns out there is. And I am going to move up here because I like moving that stuff down instead of up. So what we're actually getting into tonight is classes. And classes are awesome. Classes provide us the ability to easily manage multiple objects, pieces of code in a single template. So I am going to declare it like this. And you notice most of the time we go in this sort of camel case style, where it's a separation of words. With classes, one of the conventions that we go with it is the fact that it is uppercase. So we could easily instantiate it just with a lowercase, but an uppercase lets other developers know that this is in fact a class. So for the moment, I'm just going to do it like this, and you'll notice that we're using the function keyword. We'll get to that in a minute, and what separates function from classes and so on and so forth. So we are now going to go ahead and reference this and this .codename, and we'll get back to that. This .weapon, this .stealthy, and finally this .kill. Well, I suppose head count, and this .kill. So the next question is, where do all of these values come from? Well, we pass them in as arguments and assign them using properties. So just to be very explicit, I can spell correctly. I'm going to go ahead and pass those properties in like that, and then code name, weapon, and stealthy. And in essence, that's your first class. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that these are relative. You could just as easily name this X and it would still work fine. And thusly Y and Z. the thing that does matter is that you just keep consistent. Since this is very verbose and you know sort of exactly what's verbose, and you know exactly what's happening here, you can just do it that way. So all new assassins will start at a head count of 0 because, well, we all have to start somewhere. And kill is always going to be a function. That increments head count by 1. Just in case you are joining us for the first time and didn't catch that from our previous lesson, plus plus is the same as plus equals 1. Or this dot head count plus 1. It's just a lot easier to write out plus plus. Okay, so moving on from that, you can certainly do this, and it definitely works. Let's go ahead and with this, create our Ninja Assassin and comment out all of this down here so it doesn't get in the way. We'll get to the new keyword in just a second. And true. Let's see if we can make all of that fit on one line. Cool. And that's it. That's now our Ninja Assassin. But the cool part is that for our Warrior Assassin, it's the same amount of code. And that's scalable. We can continue to do that forever. So now let's quickly talk about new, since we're here. Well, why do we have to use new? Why can't we just go through with assassin? Well, we'd just be invoking a function then. So what new actually provides us is, in essence, it binds these various properties to the function. Now let's actually talk about what that means. And I'm going to use an analog that's mostly correct, but not 100% accurate. Basically, we are creating a new object called this. And at the end, it's what we return. One of the reasons that it's commented out is because we don't need to do this, because new does it for us. One of the other nice things is that these methods, these properties are now explicitly bound to whatever function that we end up invoking. So these don't share a similar method or pass by reference or any of that sort that I know you guys were having with objects and arrays when trying to edit them for the it wasn't shift, it was, it's escaping me at the moment, excuse me. Is it important to include this in front of the properties? Yeah, it is important to include this in front of the properties. So without it, it's not bound to anything. If you just did codename equals codename, you'd just be setting technically a local variable. And if one of the things that they haven't exactly taught you, and don't worry about this so much, it's just suggesting a more explicit binding on everything, is if you did, I think it's that, this would actually cause an error. Because A, it doesn't have any sort of variable declaration, and B, we don't actually do anything with it. You can look up usestrict on Google and it'll show you all the various things that that actually does for you. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and mark that as answered live. Beyond that, so now that we're here, this is actually something you shouldn't do. And I'll go further and explain why. So what this does is it creates a new function on every single instance of assassin. So every time you use the new keyword and call assassin, you're recreating this. And well, relatively speaking, I suppose let's go ahead and do the first thing and watch kill work here. And then we can talk about this. Sorry, trying to figure out how all of this is best put. I'm going to go ahead and run ninjaassassin.kill, and we can see that from that, well, we can see that head count has now incremented. The cool thing is that we can also see that Warrior Assassin, the head count has not incremented. If we didn't do this and just used explicitly Ninja Assassin, which is what we'd have to do, or since it's already set up, let's use Warrior Assassin, we would see that even though we called the kill function on Ninja Assassin, it incremented the head count of Warrior Assassin. So this helps you explicitly bind whatever you're looking at to that particular instance of the object. So now everything works fine. We can go ahead and use this a few more times. And Warrior Assassin.kill, just so you know it's not on 1. And the head counts are still correct. Okay. So now that that's all there, well, I do see a lot of chat going on. I'm only looking at particular questions in the Q&A. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see the Q&A button. Well, it might not necessarily show up in the Q&A, it still gets to me. All right. Continuing on, why not to declare a method in the actual assassin property? So each time you end up using the new keyword on the assassin class, it ends up creating a new instance of this function, which is nice unless you want to dynamically, which is nice except for 2 things. The first one is that it takes up space. The second one is that you can't dynamically change the function on all of your instances. For example, if halfway through the code, the cops end up getting called on all of these assassins, and this .kill now needs to be. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and edit it on the assassin class, and is now going to equal a function that says, that just console logs it's too dangerous, right? It's too dangerous right now. So now when we end up calling this, what do you think will happen? Well, let's run it and find out. It still incremented the functions. It's because each instance of kill on each thing would need to be changed. So that's obviously not what you want to do, because we're doing that same thing, right? We're repeating ourselves. Oh, there we are. That one works. But Warrior Assassin, Mr. Terminator, probably got caught by the cops. So how do we solve that? Well, luckily, when you do this, one of the things that it does, I mentioned earlier that it gets bound. So first off, let's add a happy don't do this with a few exclamation points. So luckily enough, one of the things that the new keyword does is it does something else where it binds a prototype to the assassin. Well, it actually binds the assassin to the prototype that we end up setting. Now, right now, the assassin prototype, if we console.log assassin.prototype, it's either going to log an empty object or nothing. There we are. So it logs an empty object. And obviously we're getting notifications because our kill method is commented out. So what we end up doing with that is we will now bind, I'm going to scroll down, we are now going to set a new .notation property called kill. And that is going to equal our function, and I am just going to copy and paste because technically we're still dry, even though we are copying and pasting, we're copying and pasting to refactor our code, which is perfectly all right. And even still, since the two things are bound because we're using the new keyword, this is going to refer to whatever we're binding it to, in this case, Ninja Assassin, in this case, Warrior Assassin. So now, verifying that kill works, and Ninja Assassin got to kill happy. So we're going to change the assassin prototype .kill. It's faster to type out at this point. To console log, it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous right now. And let's go ahead and run that. And cool. So we got the first two snake eyes successfully killed the first two people, and the other kills after that ended up getting logged. It's too dangerous right now. So now we can successfully and dynamically change the function based on whatever property we need to, and it will disseminate to all of its children. So going back earlier, I mentioned that everything in JavaScript is an object, which gives us something cool to do. So I'm going to comment all of this out because I will be letting you guys use this later for reference. I should probably have notated it better. I'm sorry. But that gives us something cool to do. Yesterday, or the day before yesterday, someone was asking if there was an easier way to reference. So let's build an array, right click, and it's just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just to make it easy. Someone was asking if there was an easier way to access that last item in the array other than that, because that is a bit verbose and long, and I don't want to type that out every time. Well, if you're working with your own code base, and there are times that you will be, then you can set beside. Someone's asking regarding the shortcut to comment out every line. It's just control and the lowercase question /, and it was just selecting that, do multiple lines. But yeah, we can create our own because this is a bit verbose. So let's access that global object, and we are going to access the prototype of that global object because we know that's where all of the That's where all of the methods live. And we are going to add a new one that's just last. Set that to a function. And now we can return this because we know that this is going to refer to whatever array that we're working with. And we can just do this dot length minus 1. And now when we call array.last, I've never actually done this before, so it might end up erroring out, but it should work fine. And look at that. There is still homework tomorrow. We're going over callbacks. Can I review what a prototype is compared to a class or an object? So each class, one of the reasons that we use a new keyword is to bind our normal object that we're returning, because we talked about that. When you use the new keyword, you create an object called this, and then this sucks up all of the parameters, and is returned at the end of the function. So one of the other things that new does under the hood is it applies the prototype to what we're returning. The technical term is that it inherits or extends the prototype. Kill is the method. What is the prototype? A prototype, again, a prototype is technically a hidden method that we see on the assassin object or on the assassin class. That in the context of this class function gets bound. It ends up inheriting all of the properties of the prototype. We don't use arrow functions in this mini bootcamp course. There's a few subtle differences between arrow types and normal function syntax. There's no this and there's no arguments, but other than that, it's just a syntactical difference. That is the basic setup where your parameters go in here. And the rest of the code goes in here. But again, you don't have access to this, so it doesn't actually work with creating these sorts of classes all that well. So the prototype is related to scope and the types of variables. The prototype is another object that gets bound when we're using the new keyword. So hidden in all of this, hidden here, one of the things that also happens is that we assign all of the methods of prototype. I suppose that it is more of a scope thing because we can change the methods on prototype dynamically. So rather than inheriting those instances, technically it just references the prototype, which means we can change those methods dynamically. In the end, all you have to know is that if you want your method to work appropriately across all classes and be dynamically updatable, then it needs to be in the assassin prototype. Prototype is not a method, it is a property. So kill is a method of the prototype property, sort of. Just because you'd never call prototype a property, you'd call prototype a prototype. Let me double check my notes. That's actually all I have. So if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, now would sort of be the time to ask them. If you'd like, I can just continue like going off on objects, creating new objects, continuing to edit global variables, or I can answer questions. Or I can let you guys get to the homework early. Start over. Yeah, Blueprint works well. What the term this is doing exactly? So this is a reference to whatever it's bound to. So in the case, this in this instance is referring to the array, because technically what goes on in the background when we end up using brackets is not that we create, it's not that brackets are like this newfound object that technically means array. It is pretty much just using the array prototype. 5. Let's actually do something with that. So these could be said to be anonymous. We just use this because honestly, because it relates closer to other languages and is, in my opinion, easier to read. So this just refers to whatever object it's bound to. Tyler McGinnis actually does I think does a very brilliant explanation of this. But again, this just, for most cases, what you're going to be looking at, this just refers to whatever is to the left of the dot. Is the prototype method only used for changing methods in a class? In general, yes. I haven't seen the prototype used for anything else. There was a brief ask just to review things quickly, so I am just going to comment everything out here, make sure that everything is commented out, go to the very bottom, give us some space, and let's start all from the beginning. So let's create a new, completely unused class, prototypical class, if you want to get pedantic. I don't know, let's go with a somewhat more generic method here. So user, again with that convention where it's capitalized, and it'll be a function, and we want probably a name. Let's do something somewhat random here, just to let you know that whatever is in here, you just need to be consistent, but it doesn't matter really what it is. Name, X, and age. So this dot name equals name, this dot title equals X, and this dot age equals age. Okay, so this is the class. All right. Methods. Method is anything that's on an object, which is what we're doing, because when we use the new keyword, we create an object sort of that's called this, and that's what we're assigning all of these to, because this is dot notation. So we might, I'm actually sort of curious if this works. I'll just do it with one. And then, of course, at the end of this, we're returning this. So now const lowercase Thomas, because it's not a class. This is an instance of the user class. Of the user class. It's also an object. So Thomas equals new, because we need that new keyword to create this object. User, we are going to pass in the parameters of Thomas, because that's my name. Lead TA, because that's my old title, and we'll update it later, and 25. So now let's console log me. And there you are. Thomas, lead TA, age 25. In fact, let's do a little bit more with this. This is one of the reasons why semicolons are useful, is because it's letting me know that this is the end of this. Because now I can do something like Thomas, type of Thomas, and this is going to give me what is the data type of Thomas, and lastly, Thomas instance of user, and this will let me know that this is a child of user. I believe it's been a while. And look at that. It's an object, and it is indeed an instance of user. Does JavaScript know about the instance? Gregory, I'll get to your question in just a brief moment here. I'm going to finish up this. Type of an instance of our methods. Type of an instance of our keywords. Let's bring up the exact thing. If you haven't looked at Indian, you really should. Instance of is an operator that tests whether the prototype property of a constructor appears anywhere in the prototype chain of the object. In short, it tests to see if it's a child of whatever class you're using. Now let's jump back over here. There are operators like this. We actually saw one of these earlier in the for in loop. It would be let x an object. But yeah, so type of an instance of our operators. Beyond that, let's go ahead and up here, user.prototype dot birthday. So this is being bound when you call new. That's one of the things that's happening here. So when we call this dot age, it's referring to whatever this parameter is. And we can see that. And in fact, I'm going to do something here, and probably a lot of people are going to ask questions why I put it on this side. So the reason that you do this is if you want to evaluate whatever you're incrementing before you return it. I suppose I could explain that in plain English. So this is like this dot age plus plus is this is like console log age and then add one. The other one adds one and then console logs age, except it's not console logging, it's returning. So yeah, now I can do Thomas.birthday. And it returns 26. All right. Does that make more sense, Jay? The prototype is just being bound to whatever you're using the new with. So all of the functions on the prototype get bound explicitly to this one. So there is no way that I can increment Thomas's age using the birthday method unless I explicitly use it with Thomas. So if we had const j, since you asked the question, no, because I don't feel like guessing. There is no way that I could do any magic with j.birthday, or rather with thomas.birthday to increment j. All right, Gregory, this is maybe a strange question, but does JavaScript know about the existence of classes? Given that what we actually did is create a function, is it the design instantiating a class, and that's why the prototype works with it? Yeah, JavaScript knows about the existence of classes if I'm understanding what you're asking. Because, again, how the new keyword, which is probably also technically an operator. Yeah. So new is also an operator. One of the things that the object that it does is create, let it know that this is in fact a class rather than a normal function. And because we're using the new operator, JavaScript knows that by invoking this function, we're creating a new class. So I didn't really want to get into this, and I'm just going to go quickly and at 100 miles an hour. One of the things that came with the newer versions of JavaScript, even though they're not technically versions, but let's not get pedantic here, is class instantiation. So I can do class, let's just do something basic, and constructor, we need this. This is a keyword. This lets us know exactly what's being brought in. And then I'm just going to do name and ID. So this is called syntactic sugar. It's doing the exact same thing that we're doing here. And even in order to use this, we still have to do that and pass we still have to invoke the class and and do everything. And even under the hood, it's doing exactly what we did above. But sometimes people like the looks of this because it makes more sense to them. Pencil, and of course, it is a number 2 pencil. And we can see that it's an item, and the name is pencil, and its ID is number 2. The other nice thing about this is that instead of explicitly adding stuff to the prototype, you just go outside of the constructor. So write string, or string, and now I can define my function, and it's just going to console log the plus this dot name plus wrote, because that's what we're doing with it, and lastly string, because we added it in the parameters. So now I can do item.write. This is exactly the same. 107. Oh. And I have no spaces in anything. So of course you have to add spaces, and the pencil wrote. This is exactly the same. In fact, you can even go so far as to console log item.prototype, and it shows us that write is a function. Which means that if you did that, it's going to show us that it's just a class item. These same, well, that's not going to give us much information. But if we do that right next to user, okay, so it seems like there are small differences. How to define a method that works for class, that works for the class and not an instance of the class. That works for the class and not an instance of the class. Yes, that makes sense. I don't exactly. You wouldn't put it on the class object itself. Is the end thing. You'd end up affecting the class object using outside functions. Function. This wouldn't actually work. Add. Yeah, that wouldn't actually work. But in typical, you wouldn't necessarily affect the class using a method that's defined on the class. You'd use something on. Oy vey. Generators. John, generators and yield, along with symbols, are beyond the scope of this mini bootcamp, and not explicitly used because of things like symbols and other instances that are just much easier to use. If you're in the spot that you have to use a generator, you might be looking in the wrong direction. Jay, off-topic question. All of the lectures keep telling us that var is no longer used, but every time I go to MDN, I see it being used. So in that regard, one of the reasons why we no longer the end reason that we no longer say use var is because let's just give us some space. Const test equals test. Const test equals not a test. This is going to give us an error. Duplicate declaration test. With let duplicate declaration with var. It's fine. The other weird thing, let's change this back to let, let's comment this out. We're getting undefined because test isn't undefined. Let's make this a little bit more explicit and do that. So there's test, it's undefined. Let's make this a series of numbers. Now let's change this to var. Oh, that's not what I was expecting. That's a little funny. Huh. Well then, I stand corrected in that regard. The last reason is, let's just do an if statement. Let test equal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And console log test. Test is not defined. All right. Const is the same way. Var. Oh, look at that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you might be thinking, oh cool, this works without scoping. But what this ends up meaning is that in your for loop, your var I ends up being declared in your next for loop too. And while you are setting it to 0 in both of these, there are instances where you want to use I without it being set, or without it being previously declared to another number. And it's instances like that that end up getting you in trouble. So in the end, the reason why var is still widely used is because it was the way it was for 14 years. ES5 only came around in like 2000, I want to say 15. But I could be completely off base. It might be as late as 2017. The second reason is that it just gets you into a lot of trouble with where you're declaring your stuff. The third reason is that var sticks around. It doesn't get garbage collected and it ends up taking up your memory when you're building these giant applications. Is an empty object still an instance of an object, or can there be an example of an object without an instance? So even if you are doing const my item equals new item, and we'll just end up invoking it. I like sometimes giving long tags because it ends up making it more readable. My item is still an instance of item. This is my item example, true. All right, there's 5 minutes left for this class. I'm going to clear out a few of these. So, Gregory, you want to use the prototype method to define all. The question was, is the prototype method used for only changing methods in the class? You want to define all of your general methods, your archetype methods, your prototype methods inside of the prototype class. Uh, that way, that way they aren't. I'm trying to think of how I can explain this simply. If you define a method inside of a function class, uh, one of these, what sorry, one of these. What ends up happening is that individual class, each individual user class has a new instance of that function. So you're taking up memory, and if you need to change that function dynamically for whatever reason, you'd have to change it on each instance of the original user class. Garth, did I ever answer your question regarding what this does exactly? Okay, awesome. John, in regard to the real course, we cover the things that Lambda's hiring partners have told them the graduating students needs to know. So I wouldn't say we go over everything with a fine-tooth comb. We in fact don't get into generators and yield, but I can guarantee you that you will know enough JavaScript by the end of it that you can go out and learn, take 5 minutes and learn what generators and the symbol iterator and all of that does on your own. The idea, one of the biggest ideas of Lambda School, and one of the things that I like the most, is that it teaches you how to learn. Now, I understand that almost sounds like a cop-out saying that we don't actually teach you anything, and instead we just force you to read hours and hours and hours of documentation. Now, I'm not saying that you will never read documentation, as I'm about to go read documentation. What I am saying is that we provide you the resources and accessibility to people that have worked live in the field. We provide you live instruction on the things that people in the industry, on what hiring partners have said graduates need to know. We then go further into that and teach you computer science developmentals, which most immersive courses don't do. We do go through asynchronous programming using callbacks, using then and catch, using async await. We cover the whole 9 yards in asynchronous programming because it was something that the hiring partners felt were important. If you go to learn.lambdaschool.com, you can catch the overview of everything of the full 6 months, 7 months now. In applied JavaScript, in applied JavaScript, we go through everything from, I'm just going to read these. You can debug the DOM and JavaScript dev tools, which we went over a little bit in this course. With this, you'll actually learn how to full-blown debug your JavaScript through and through. You'll be able to explain what the DOM is. The DOM is the document object model. It's the tree that ends up rendering all this stuff. You can use DOM selectors like document get element by name div turns a node list with a link of 0 by tag name. Get elements by tag name. Oh. It also doesn't teach you how to spell because, I mean, it's a programming course. And this is every single div that's in this particular web page. Of course, this is just something small and pedantic that I can easily show off. Use selectors to select the documents. That's what we just went through. Use different properties and methods to manipulate the selected element. This is 4 weeks in after going much heavier into HTML and CSS to the point where we use Bootstrap and preprocessors to manipulate static web pages and be able to create things that you'd see on Dribbble or Awards. For whatever reason, both of those have 3 letters that are repeated in a row. Yeah, so this is week 3. No, sorry, this is week 4. This is the start of week 4. This is a month in, where this is all about Bootstrap, preprocessors, and so much more. We go through basics of fluid design, etc., and so forth. We just start JavaScript here because we're teaching you that much about HTML, CSS, preprocessors, the whole 9 yards that you'd need to do a beautiful UI course without learning, well. Okay, anyway. Greg, you said earlier about using the prototype when we want a method in a class that we're making, instead of making a property with a function. That's correct. If all of your functions should go in the prototype. All of your methods to a class should go in the prototype. When I console log, displayed over 4 lines. Why they're reflecting differently? That's probably up to the console. It might just be some sort of line length thing. I would add a few more values to Siri and see if that spans out. Except jQuery is bad. I mean, okay, jQuery isn't bad. That's a very personal opinion. jQuery is getting replaced by things like React and React, Lodash, Angular, any framework or library that has any interaction at all to do with the DOM. Second of all, one of the reasons that we do teach those is because you should learn to crawl before you run. So you're learning those because it is still important. For example, in every single React application, get element by ID or get element by class name or whatever is used at least once, and it's to catch whatever React DOM is rendering to. Like, these things are still valid. I wouldn't say it's outdated at all, and it gives you the ability to program without a library like jQuery or React.js. So you can program in your browser without importing anything. Anyway, we've gone over time. I still need to release the homework. jQuery is still used in a lot of stuff, and it will be continued to be released in a lot of stuff, in my opinion, for the same reasons that var is still used in a lot of stuff. But with JavaScript, one of the reasons that both var and jQuery will be used probably forever is because this is an opinionated language, or this is not an opinionated language, rather. and you can do whatever you like. One of the things I would like to say while we're still here, and I still have you guys for a few brief minutes, is that our React course is actually fantastic. Like a month and a half in, you build an Instagram clone. And just continue through awesome projects like that. We actually just added Vue to the course because hiring partners said that you wanted Vue, so now you learn Vue and React. I am trying to convince them to start throwing in more brown bags regarding new exciting languages like Elixir and Go and Nim and Crystal, and even a bit on Ruby, because Ruby's just fine. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining me here tonight. I'm sorry it wasn't your usual instructor. She should be back in time for tomorrow. If not, you'll be seeing Dan, more than likely. Other than that, we start your PM hosted group sessions at 7 p.m. PST, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.